Welcome to the Season 6 wrap-up episode of What I Did Next from ANT Media. I'm Malak Fuad. As we come to the end of Season 6, I'm joined by the show's producer, Chirag Desai, to look back at our latest lineup of guests. As always, we cast our eyes back to the highlights of the season, pulling out common threads among our guests, as well as more general observations and insights from our recent conversations. We also discuss the issue of crisis management. This is discussed in the context of the Gaza war, the global economic downturn, and other challenges. This is a big picture conversation that impacts all of us and comes on the heels of discussions I've had recently with friends about concurrent crises happening around the world.
Well, hello again, Malak.
Hi, Chirag. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're a little bit surprisingly so at the end of a season, end of the year. There's lots happening to some degree, I
can't
guess.
believe that the year has gone by really, really fast.
It has. I think so too, yeah.
I'm just floored at how fast the year has gone. And then, of course, the fact that we're at the end of season 6 is quite unbelievable for me. So
it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. We were getting shocked at episode 50, and all of a sudden, like, 50's come, 50's gone.
That's right. That's right. It's quite something, yeah.
So, as always, I mean, we try and catch up towards the end of the season to kind of see how the season went. So one of the things I wanted to mention this time, so of course we talk about pivots with our guests, right? I thought what was interesting this season is it was the other kind of pivot. It was the active choice pivot, so to speak. Both of our sort of ending episodes, as we look at Yusra, who first of all, like, amazing, right? Like you got to interview her and speak to her about her career. But when you mentioned to her about Shaheen and sort of it was a director-actor combination that obviously, is legendary. She mentioned how she was so keen on working with him because she knew if she could succeed with him, it would define her career.
I said to myself, if I flop with Shaheen, then I'm a loser. So either I succeed with this gentleman or not. My core was to succeed with the most difficult person.
And then everything else would be easy.
Yes.
And then similarly, we had Rami, Adib, who moved to Canada for high school. And again, it was an active choice, right? So he was obviously very young when he did this. You saw the same way, right? She was in her early 20s. Rami, even younger, he was in high school. So I thought it was really interesting that we had these examples of people actively making choice very early in life to change the course of their careers.
I just want to go back a step because just before we hit the record button on this episode, I just told you that I was a bit at a loss at the beginning of this wrap up, and how in previous seasons we had some very clear patterns and clear impressions that came out of the season, and how somehow there was this magical thread that seemed to tie guests to each other without even us consciously trying to place those guests in the same season. It just organically happened, like season 5, where we had this very strong sense of identity that came through from a lot of our guests.
Yep.
But your observation about this season is very, very interesting, and I hadn't considered it at all. But it's true. I mean, we all make at some point in our lives very conscious decisions about something, whether it's a personal choice, whether we decide that's the person I'm going to get married to, whether we decide that's the job I'm going to leave because it's not making me happy, or I'm better off in a different career. These are all conscious moves we make. And I think that that's a very strong current that did come out this season. I was looking at it much more superficially. What connects all these people that we've had in this season? We've had some really very diverse group of people. We've had Imran Ahmed. His company, the business of fashion, covers the Middle East. Obviously, it covers the global.
Ways,
he created his own path within fashion, which hadn't been there before. So that was interesting. And then, as you already mentioned Yusra and Rami. We saw it also with Mo Hevzi. Mo could have taken an easy route and worked in the family business. Obviously, Nadine Abdel Ghaffar, similar. She crafted her own path in the art and a heritage world, and it was a path that hadn't been there before. She was a trailblazer in that department.
She was one of the people who I also marked in the same thing, because she talked about while she was in university, she started a business on the side that was in the art space, because
Yes,
she was very clear she wanted to be in art, but she saw this opportunity. It had to do with the wallpaper.
a paint
Yeah,
company.
it was the wall paint for the interior stuff. She saw it. She took a course in it. She pitched the guy to say, "Hey, how about I become your rep
Yep, yep.
in Egypt?" And they're so interesting, right? Because they're not what I would call like reactionary pivots, right? They're not in
No,
response to
exactly.
a situation. It's just there is an opportunity and I want it, right?
And then we obviously have Magdi Yaoub, who's in a category all his own on potentially every level of
Yeah,
pivot points, life saving career. That's his mission, that's his vocation.
huge impact as well. Yeah,
Huge, huge. And then, very interestingly, we have someone like Amina Naguib, who on paper would look very different to the rest of them, but actually also very consciously crafted her own path, and then went from has been in a very successful space, which is the fitness space in Egypt, and then is now reassessing how she wants to be within that space. So it's been a very interesting mix of people. But yeah, as you said, Chirag, this thread of conscious pivots is there throughout.
when you look at someone like Dr. Magdi Yaqub, right? Like for me, I mean, he's just a stalwart, right? Like there's no, you don't really have to. I think Yusra to some degree, I would also maybe put in the film industry in her category the same way. I think they just have so much experience. You almost with them, you almost feel like, of course, they knew they were going to become a doctor, which he says, right? He decided he was going to be a doctor at 3, which is to me, just hearing that is nuts. Like I can't imagine that, and I love that. I love watching that, especially in contrast to not just previous guests, but sort of our own journeys, right? When we kind of look back and saying, I had no idea what I was going to do when I was 3. So it's
Absolutely. And I'm in a bigger picture. I'm always in awe. And I've mentioned it in many of the interviews over
yes,
the
you have,
last few years. People who know what they want from a young age,
yeah,
something that I've never been able to do. It's quite impressive, to know at a young age what you want to do, go for it, have no doubts, and then keep going down that path
yeah,
and wake up every morning with enthusiasm, ready to go. I mean, that's a doctor for you. Doctors are like that.
yeah, they are.
Being a person of, some sort of religious figure, an imam or a priest, it's a vocation. It's just something in you that you don't doubt it. It's just there.
And we've actually talked about this in previous wrap ups, right? Sort of this, the line between the personal and the professional is pretty blurry in these cases, right? Like we have,
Yes.
you're a doctor, but you identify as a doctor. It's your personality. It's not just your profession. As you mentioned,
And you
religious
don't
heads
switch
are the same
off.
way.
You
You
don't
don't
just
switch
say at
off,
five
exactly.
o'clock, I'm not a doctor anymore because I have to go to a dinner. That's not how it works,
Well,
you know?
in Dr. Yaqub's case, he's not doing that at 3 a.m. He's getting up and reading
Absolutely.
research at 3 a.m. So it
Absolutely.
doesn't even stop at 5.
You obviously don't need much sleep.
I do actually.
How do you manage that?
I go to bed relatively early, but I wake up just after midnight or 1 o'clock, and instead of wanting to go back to sleep, I start reading and enjoying myself. And I found over the years that that's a very, very good time, productive time when things are quiet, and
Yeah.
my mind is even working much faster than during the day.
Interestingly, what I find, the older the guest, obviously the more they've done. And so the more they're able to look back. I don't know if this is a generalization or if it's actually something we can go back and quantify, but the older the guest, the more they've done, the more they're able to look back and think of those pivot points and think of those milestones with some distance as well. When you're younger, you notice the changes or you notice those stepping stones, but you might not realize how important they are. Um, but when you do look back with a bit of distance and age, you are able to say, oh, that was really, really important to me, or that really marked a change in my life.
I think there is a certain amount of reflection that starts entering your sort of mental space as you grow older.
Hmm.
So I think it's just something that comes with time. And so when you have someone like a Yusra or Dr. Yaqub,
Yeah.
they're at those stages of their career where now they're not just giving back, they've gone past giving back also,
Yeah.
right?
But the flip side of that is that I think that COVID was a game changer for everyone,
Absolutely, yeah.
regardless
Mhm.
of age. And so that made people literally stop. And that's regardless of age. So, that has been, younger people have been affected by that. And I think the people who are very self aware are able to make whatever changes they want to make. We'll continue our wrap up right after this break. Welcome back. I'm Malak Fuad, and you're listening to our season wrap-up episode with my producer, Chirag Desai.
The other thing I wanted to mention also was, and it has a lot to do with the fact that we're doing these bonus episodes, is I'm actually really liking the deep dives we're able to do into professions now a little bit more than we were. Um, and I think it's just allowing us a little bit more space to not just to ask the questions, but I think the questions were always being asked, but to allow it to be a little bit more of conversation around those things. So I think it's been I'm actually really enjoying those parts.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I think personally for me, this season Mo Hebsi's was interesting, but it's only because it's also interesting to me personally.
Yeah.
Where he talks about sort of the concept of producing for other people and how to put on that hat, and so it's just really interesting to get that kind of insight from someone who's who
Definitely.
has such a tremendous amount of experience.
As an interviewer, it has allowed me not to have to rush through their journey because,
Yeah.
because we have the bonus episode now, we have a venue for the more in-depth material that's come out of it. That's not necessarily specifically linked to our theme or the theme of the show, but is such valuable information and such such a great conversation that I'm really glad that we've been able to incorporate that and include it. And as you mentioned, Mo's episode was great, as well as Amina's. Amina's also, her bonus was really interesting.
I think across every season we've had all of these great minds opine on things like social media, right? And how they see what the impact of social media on society, things like tech and AI, of course. So it's been really nice that we get these insights.
Absolutely.
So that's been actually, it's been fun. I think, like I said, that this season we've had a chance to kind of, now it's part of our programming, which has
Yeah.
been, so it's a lot more
Yeah.
structured, and we're allowing for a lot more space to it, unlike previous seasons. That's been, for me, that's been a nice thing with the season as well.
I agree.
My last note, well, with regards to the season itself, was kind of a standout episode, which I wanted to give a shout out to. I know you've already mentioned her, but well, it was the episode with Amina. For me, it was a first, right? Because it was the first time we had a guest on who had this very critical pivot that was also a pivot for you, right? So it was this
Yeah.
interesting tie-in between the two of you. So far, it's always been, yes, of course, these are great conversations, but you're still an interviewer.
It's interesting you say that, because for me, I was very conscious not to overstep because it's her story.
Yeah.
There was a lot more I could have said, but I didn't want to. But yes, we are very linked. We're also very linked because, where our families are so close. So there's that as well. But yeah, we shared an important moment that was quite traumatic, very traumatic for her and her family. Less traumatic for me, but also marked me in a way.
Of course, yeah.
My children were with me that day as well, and that was, I was very aware of how would they be a few days later, a week later, would it leave an impact on them? And luckily it didn't. But and I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for her, but I have a feeling her kids were okay as well, and I think that's probably a question of youth. um, you know, in a way, sometimes children are able to just assimilate things and not delve too much on them, whereas adults overthink and think so much about what's happened, and so it leaves more of a trace. I don't know. As I said, I can't speak for her children, but in my case, I was lucky that my kids were okay
That's
from that.
true. But I would add that I think it also has to do with, with the way that the two of you responded as well. And I think that sets, maybe not as an example, but that sets the a space for that, right? I mean, you guys talked about it in the episode as well, right? Where Amina mentioned that her husband was absolutely insistent that they take that route again with the kids, and kind of sort of, almost like push past the fear.
Prior to that, my kids wouldn't get into a car in Cairo. They were very like shocked and afraid. So we did that. We got into the car. We took the same drive. It was yeah, I was anxious the whole time. Other than that, we also had to deal with a way of living, or sort of, am I going to just pretend it never happened and move on? How am I going to shift? And what I like and to teach my kids, because I always feel like the kids will learn most from what they see, not just what they learn. And I assessed my whole life and realized I wasn't living. I was on a treadmill. I was just working, making sure they were fed, that they went to school, that they were healthy, that they were all the check boxes. And I just decided that I just didn't want to live that way anymore.
And I was also very privileged that she spoke about it on my show for the first time.
Yeah.
She hasn't spoken about it before. Her close friends are aware of the sort of learning journey she's on,
Mhm.
but it's not something she's spoken about in a wider context. So I was quite lucky to get her to speak.
From an impactful episode point of view, and from something
Yeah.
that left a mark, I think it was great. There was a lot of inspiration to take away from it too.
It's funny you say that, because Hatim, my husband, listens to each show, and he doesn't hear them ahead. So he
Right.
doesn't hear them, once you and I are done with the edits. He hears them in his podcast player like everyone else, and he,
Mhm.
on his way to the gym or whatever. And he said to me his favorite two episodes of the season were Amina and Rami.
Right.
And they are not household names, they are not your star, but he found their stories very, very moving. And that's what I love about What I Did Next, because we're able to bring in people who are not well known, don't have a public profile, but whose stories really do leave an impact. And then you also have the very well known people like the Megdi Yaoubs, who are also leaving an impact and whose stories are unbelievable as well. So
Yeah.
I like that mix of well known people and people who are not known, and I think that's really, for me, that's the essence of the show, actually. And that's what I love. I love to have that mix. That's one of my very conscious. That's how I consciously select guests for each
Yeah, I'm
episode,
glad you said
each
that, because I
season.
was about to point out that it isn't, again, it's not something that just happens by chance.
No,
There's a
no,
conscious element to it.
absolutely.
And I think, and I know we've sort of highlighted that previously as well, that it's not limited to just like you said, well, let's call them household names and not so much
Yeah,
household names,
exactly.
but it's also across industries, it's across the region. And we do it at a seasonal level, but it also happens at a show level to a degree, where we're able to take these different stories, almost bring them to a level, right, with terms of saying, okay, let's look at the pivots, let's look at those impactful moments, and everybody has them, which is something we keep reciting right at the start of every episode. And then now we're sitting here in the wrap up looking at threads between the different pivots, right? So I think it's this interesting space where we get to be a little bit inspired, but we get to learn and we get to see how people react to things. And hopefully it leaves an impression, like to say, okay, well, maybe I can take this step, so that can be one way. Or when you're looking at a situation that's been difficult, to say, look, I mean, here's a whole host of people who've bounced back from different kinds of situations. So there's always space to bounce back.
Yeah, and just the human capacity for reinvention and finding new footings again, it's always amazing to me. People really do bounce back from really dire situations and are able to craft a new vision, find a new way to live, and I'm always amazed by that. It's just, I find that very inspirational.
I think also, and this kind of links to, a little bit to the next thing we want to talk about, but uh, there's also this kind of like, there aren't black and white answers to everything, right? Like, not everybody has the answers to everything as well. You know, most of our conversations are about people who figured it out, right? Not that, oh, I knew exactly what to do in a certain situation, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's take the same example we just used with the Yusra and Shaheen. Yes, she realized it was a pivotal moment. Yes, she went and grabbed it. But how does she open the story? She ran away from him because she was like, "Oh my god, this is scary," right?
Yeah.
It's not everybody. Nobody has the answers actually, and I think that's really interesting. That keeps coming back to be like, okay, I figured it out like this, right? I did this to figure that out. I mean, you have someone at one end like an Imran who he does that based on data, right? There he's sitting in he's created a research division now within his company where they're going and looking at all of these different pieces of data and surveying and understanding what people want and then showing up and doing that. And then you have, like I said just now, like you have
Yeah.
these
And
emotional responses to things, right? And that's all, they're all okay, right?
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
whole spectrum.
definitely. No, and I think the bottom line is like with everything in life, everything is trial and error. So depends on the degree of it. But some of us, try things many times until we land on what we want. Other people don't have to try things many times; they land on it immediately. But yeah, that's a human condition, I guess, right?
That's also, for me, it's a takeaway from the show, right? You speak to, like, again, let's use the same nomenclature, right? The household names, the non-household names, and they all come out with the same thing, right? Where we found this, we saw it, we looked at it, we're resilient enough, we are positive enough, we're going to figure it out. And they're happy to share that journey, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. Speaking of not having the answers to things, I think one of the things that's how I've actually titled this section, because that's as I was reflecting back on it, that was the feeling, right? Is I think we just nobody had answers. We were figuring it out. But one of the things we also wanted to talk about is that obviously this season, we had quite a pivotal moment that was happening in the region, and we also had to look at what we're doing as a business, in terms of how we're communicating, what we're putting out. So maybe let's start by getting a little bit of your thoughts about how you're feeling.
As our guests know, or as our audience knows, we don't talk politics on the show. Very clear demarcation lines for me when I began the show. No religion, no politics. It was very much, I wanted it to be a positive show. That was always the outlook for me. And I think we've achieved that. But this season, we have had to deal with external forces that were beyond our control. And I just want to address that a little bit. Like a lot of businesses in the region, we've been impacted by the crisis. And this is my old PR hat coming on. Um, Crisis management is a very hard thing to navigate, and each crisis is different. There's no manual, there's no guidebook, there's no standardized way to handle it. Our social media team had advised us that a lot of their clients, regardless of what the client was, were taking a step back from social media. They were not doing any promotional work. A lot of our interviews had taken place well before uh, the war began.
All of them, in fact, yeah.
Yeah, all of them. Our strategy was to go ahead and publish and do basic social media posts, but not do any additional promotion against any of it. So we laid very low compared to what we normally do. And, that was a call we made. Now, every business will have been impacted. Our business will have been impacted. And I think we'll only know how much in a few months' time, because obviously we have to review things. With hindsight. But it was a very difficult period. And, we're not the only ones. A lot of people around us felt it. So yeah, these are things we have to navigate. They're things we have to juggle and be nimble about. And to a large extent, we have to take in our stride. That's reality. And it's difficult. It's difficult because you're having to think on your feet. You're having to make decisions that, there's a domino effect. But we felt we did the right thing. We wanted to be respectful of the situation, and obviously, this is a very, very small business, you know, and being wanting to move up and wanting to grow as a business is very, very tricky in this environment. And you know, it's like one step forward and five steps back. That's been my experience in the last, not just with this crisis, but with the larger economic situation that we're facing, specifically in Egypt. A lot of things you want to take one step forward, and you dangle one foot in the water to see what the temperature is, and you realize it's not the time, so you have to go back again. And it can be disheartening, but that's the reality of it, and we just have to keep going and trust in the process, and trust that when the time is right, things will unfold organically.
I think you have, like you said, you trust in the process, you trust in the people around you to kind of debate and make the right calls. And then you learn along the way, right? And yes, to some degree, you can learn just by seeing what others are doing. But I think one of the things, at some point, you have to stick back towards what your brand stands for, what you're trying to do, and it's not, everything's not the same, everything's not cookie cutter, right?
Yeah.
So there are, and we saw that during this process, right? Like different people, all of whom are in the content space in some way, and I'll generalize that way, all took different approaches to this,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think there was a wrong approach somewhere in there, but everybody took the approach that they felt was right. And similarly, I think you have to kind of keep going back to that. One of the things I talk about quite often is sort of having a purpose when you begin. I say that for shows, I say that for companies, and all of that. And I think the reason to have that is situations like this is where you have to go back to that book and say, okay, how does this align? Does it align or does it not align? And if it doesn't align, what do we need to do, right? Well, we're not going to get into all of those different sort of decision paths we took and the choices we made, but there were more than once it's happened, right, where we discussed an option and then we reflected on it, and then either you came back and said, I don't feel good about doing X, or I don't like this option, and sometimes I did, right, where I came back and said,
Sure.
no, I don't think this is how we should do it. And so I think it comes down to being this whole this, I know it's an overused word today, but it's staying authentic to yourself, staying authentic to your brand and your purpose. I think that the reason about that, this is where those things get tested. Again, it's also important, why you mentioned the social media team advising us something. I mean, why we started working with them was because what they were doing, what we're doing was aligning well, right? And so today we're able to sort of lean on their expertise to say, okay, how do you feel about it? What are other people in the space doing? Can we learn from it? Does it align with us? And if it does, great, then that's what we'll do.
And I think that the key in any crisis management scenario is being nimble, being able to address situations on a continuing basis. So not make a decision and then say, I've made the decision.
Right.
You're always going to go back and say, okay, now what? Today is different. Is there another approach? Do we amend it? Do we change it? Do we tweak it? So I think that was key, that we had that communication amongst ourselves always open, and keeping an eye on things and making sure that what we were doing was appropriate, that we were not overstepping. So I think that definitely is something we did. And as you said, being aligned as a team makes a big difference. We've now all been working together for a couple of years, right? I mean, you and I from the beginning, but
Correct.
with the social media team, it's been a couple of years, and
it's been 2 years,
and they understand what the show's about. They get super excited when there's a special guest that they want to hear from. So there's a lot of synergy there, and so it works well, and we take their advice on a lot of what's happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that brings us to the end of, I'm still kind of, processing the end of 2023 here, but yes, that brings us to the end of the season for now.
Yeah.
So yeah, as always, it was good talking. I like doing these catch-ups. I think they give us a little bit of a moment to reflect as well. And yeah, to everybody, have a good, safe holiday season, and see you next year.
Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in March 2024. Thank you for joining us today. We'll have one more episode next week with our partners, EFG Holding, and we'll be back with a new season in March of next year. Until then, you can catch all our previous episodes on your favorite podcast player and enjoy some of the longer clips on YouTube. You can also follow us for updates on Instagram, X, and on LinkedIn. Just search for What I Did Next. See you soon.